My success in this challenge was because of a glitch, but as it turns out, it wasn't my fault. Let me explain. So right off the bat, within the Dead Cells community, shields are an interesting topic of discussion. Being in early access for over a year, players had plenty of time to let the developers know their thoughts on the game's design. Because of this, indie studio Motion Twin could look through the countless forum and discussion posts regarding tweaks that the game needed and improve from there. Long story short, if there's something wrong with the shields in your game, you're gonna hear about it. And that's exactly what happened, as many early adopters cited a total lack of use for the secondary item due to its slow speed and low payoff. And listening to these community suggestions, through later patches such as the Elemental update, Motion Twin cleaned up the thing and brought some new life to the weapon with the addition of a force field and buffs to the assault side of the item. Well, as someone who's used the shield in its side slot throughout a good chunk of my almost 100 runs through the game so far, I definitely felt like I couldn't shy away from today's shield-only challenge. And these are the rules I set for myself. After starting up a new save slot, so I didn't have the benefit of any extra goodies scored with my more traditional playthroughs, I decided that to give proper respect to the item's defensive nature, I would have to limit myself on every single offensive option the game had laid out for me. And that meant no use of any indirect or deployable abilities such as wolf traps, double crossbow-matics, or even sinew slicers. No skills such as vampirism, although these won't really buff very much in a defensive run anyway, so you can pretty much scratch them out. One of the main abilities I wanted to avoid in this run was the use of the ground pound drop. This skill can be used to do some decent damage on impact and greatly reduce the frequency of stun debuffs when suffering from a tall drop. Now, one thing to point out about this move in particular is that it serves as its own challenge, just try not to use it. Seriously, the button input combination is exactly the same as dropping from a platform, but if you're above a ladder or climbable chain, then you'll just fall through in the damage landing. And if there's some poor zombie beneath you that you just happen to smack with the side of your boot, guess what? That's a challenge failure. Partner this with my habitual best practice of just using this move for extra damage each time I'm falling in a main run, and it turns out to be a really tough pattern to kick. But that's enough about my pathetic struggle of accidentally pressing the down and jump button. More importantly, to round off our game's conditions here, if it does any direct damage, be it through explosions, arrows, swiping, stabbing, piercing, smashing, crushing, kicking, or slashing, check it at the spawn door, because it's not going to fly in this challenge. So with the mode laid out, I was set to embark on a new and inspiring journey through the world's charming landscapes that would eventually transform my whole perception of how video game combat systems work and how— ouch! Oh geez. Yeah, this wasn't just gonna be some kind of cakewalk, but let's get into that. My first run was nothing special. Picked up a shield on my way out of the opening chamber and went in search of the next section. Although my earlier experience with the game's parry system did allow for some clean matchups, I lost a chunk of time looking for the exit to the promenade. This overall meant that I missed out on a large part of the game's time bonuses, which are absolutely crucial for success in this challenge. Since you can't level enemies with the same speed that you would in a regular run, you need to rely on the cell caches in these timed rooms for unlockables down the road. And if my earlier lack of direction was any indication, the rest of this first run didn't amount to too much. Finally arriving to the game's second area, I made it to the required elite archer encounter, but couldn't hold my own. As much as I could reflect the arrows, poor placement with the summoned zombies led me to die, cheat death, but then get swiftly tackled back down, so I guess that's run 1. To my surprise, my second take served as a pretty great improvement upon my earlier shortcomings. Factoring in some better placement and a much heavier use on my dodge roll, I stepped onto the promenade with a respawn mutation in just a minute 4 on the clock. Oh man, you hear that? Yeah, it's just the sound of me snapping the gosh darn sound barrier in half. I made it to the time door with plenty of seconds to spare and scored a fat stash of 14 cells as well as some extra gold, some upgrades, and a blueprint for a slick new assault shield, which would come in handy later, but don't tell nobody, shh. But even with my newfound super speed, I still had to bank pretty heavily on a cautious playstyle to make my way back to where I was before. Thanks to some low stats and the obvious lack of stabby stabs or shooty shoots, I really didn't have much to hold off the ever-growing horde of beasts snacking on my ankles as it just ran away. And while I'm on this topic of enemy control, let me just say, I'm officially declaring right here that flying enemies are to be deemed the biggest enemies of this challenge. With a parry window that just floors it down the expressway, it's pretty dang tough to lock down any significant counters on these guys without just letting them charge into your idle shield. But when you've got a growing swarm of these dudes swimming around your head, they'll leave a big enough mark to kill you and then some. But thanks to the power of locked doors and impassable gates, I was able to cross into the archer zone and prove myself worthy once and for all. This time I lucked out way more with the assist spawns and was able to line up each of my parries for an easy kill on that big baddie. Cue big explosion of goodies and loot, and smack dab in the middle was my ticket out of there. The Vine Rune. Using this new key ability to climb out, I set back on my path through the section with few trials or tribulations and passed right through that glowing doorway straight to the ramparts. With a 3:30 on the clock and a chunk of cells in my pocket, I deposited just over halfway toward a new assault shield and locked up another mutation bonus of 30% additional health and strolled right along to the ramparts. But my time in this section didn't hold up as well. While hunting for a time door to snag an extra slew of treasure, I stumbled upon another elite archer in the lower floor of one of the towers. And, being the fool that I am, I planted my feet and set up for another rematch. Whole different story here though. See, because I literally had my back against a wall in our crammed makeshift arena, I had no easy positions to lock down any shots in the spawned-in zombies. So I was quickly bombarded by a whole gang down in that pit. Trying to escape, I just narrowly avoided death before I was able to bounce out of there and quickly realize, oh yeah, elite archers can teleport. And you know what that means. Catch you in attempt number 3. Now here's where I think the beauty of the game's roguelike structure really shines through. Kicking off the challenge, I was starting to feel a little stupid for what I'd gotten into. I mean, heck, the game even begs you to use your primary weapon at least once, but I couldn't just let those doubts discourage me. Now, despite picking up some more stat boosts and even a different shield earlier on, the first part of this challenge was really just following in the footsteps of the previous attempt, so nothing new to report there. But as soon as I got to the ramparts again, it was a whole different vibe. Picking up a new set of scrolls, as well as being able to lock down a timed door this run, I was stacked with a wide bar of health and plenty of spending power by the time I crash landed at the entrance to the Black Bridge. Anyone who's played Dead Cells before is well aware of what lies on the other side of that pathway. The Concierge, otherwise known as the game's first true boss. Finishing up the down payment on my assault shield, I showed up to the fight double stacked with defense, and I was ready for whatever exciting showdown was in store. Off the bat, my first optimal strategy was to try to assault shield charge back and forth through the slow moving baddie so he wouldn't score any time to attack me. And while this worked to whittle away his first nibble of health, after his first phase change and the introduction of the red force field to the mix, I had to change up my tactics quick. So I started parry stunning him with my trusty cudgel, and was taken aback to find that I was actually doing poison damage each time I countered. And the reason being is that this wasn't a buff on the shield that I was using, but rather the assault shield that I had second slotted by this stage in the fight. Now if you ask me for why I think this happens, I think it's most likely due to the fact that both being of the same weapon type, the actions of one triggered the other, even though it was out of use. So after discovering my new optimal strategy, I set up to the next few minutes of dealing some initial and lingering damage to the boss, until, after almost 6 minutes of fighting, I finally wore down his life and came out the victor. Now, if the run had just ended here, I would have called it a success. I honestly never expected with my skill level to be able to take down the Concierge, and especially not on a third attempt. But oddly enough, my surprise didn't just end here. Now I would have thought myself a goner by the time I made it to Still Village, especially because of the new mix of enemies with counter patterns I wasn't as familiar with. But here as well, I kept on stat boosting and holding true to avoiding and rolling past enemies, netting myself the keys necessary to bust through the town and out toward the clock tower. After making this far, I had two very distinct feelings. Shock at how far just some shields had gotten me, and disappointment at the fact that I had only made it here once before in a regularly stacked run. And my lack of experience showed some fears here. I was very unsure which paths would be likely candidates to chase for the escape keys. Throw on top some ridiculously aggressive enemies with crazy attack patterns, and I was practically writing the odds of me losing for betting rings myself. But running out of options left to search on the map led me finally to the Clockmaker's Key, and next thing I was off in an express elevator right to completely new territory for me. Since I was learning the moves for my very first time, each attack threw off my guard in some new way, until eventually I just couldn't keep up. But don't think for a second that I'm not proud of the progress I made here. With a total time on this run of about 26 minutes, with just 2 shields, I've been able to severely damage a boss I hadn't even researched beforehand, and that's pretty satisfying in my book. So now that I'm clearly an elite shield bearer myself, and 100% the #1 authority on this subject, how would I suggest you take on this challenge? First off, learn your dodge roll and use it consistently. If you're not making it to the promenade in time for the door, just try again, because it's such a key role for upgrades later on. While I do suggest looking for an alternative shield earlier on, I recommend against getting lost in search for it, as this can lead to crucial losses in speed and even unaccounted for deaths. Finally, I would say use your very first enemy encounters to master parry windows easy peasy. If you play with exclamation points on, they're just the most obvious and clean-cut indicator as to when to press your shield button for a counter. Keep those in mind and you should be able to get even further than I did with my 3 attempts. Hey there, if you want to see future challenge videos like this, then make sure to parry that subscribe button. And hey, if you want to see another player of the rules, then don't use a sword in the top right, and especially don't use any kind of bow in that video in the bottom right. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and you have a good one, alright?